The room smelled faintly of chalk and old paper, the kind of scent that clings to quiet hours and sharpened pencils. Sunlight fell in soft rectangles across the desks, dust drifting lazily through the beams. Every sound, the scratch of pens, the steady rhythm of her heels across the floor, seemed sharper in that stillness. She spoke with calm authority, her voice measured and confident, yet laced with a gentleness that made even her reprimands sound like lessons in patience. "Some things," she said, pausing by the window, "are simply against the rules." Her tone was even professional, but something in the way her eyes met his made the words feel less like a warning and more like a test. He hadn't meant to notice her this much. She was older, experienced, the kind of woman who carried her years with the elegance of someone who never tried too hard. The faint lines near her mouth hinted at laughter, not age. Her dark hair was pulled loosely at the nape of her neck, a few strands catching the light like threads of silk. When she turned, those strands swayed slightly, brushing against her collarbone. He lowered his gaze, pretending to take notes, but his thoughts blurred somewhere between her words and the soft rhythm of her breathing as she walked past his desk. There was a grace in her movements, precise but unhurried, like someone who had learned long ago that time was a luxury. After class, as everyone filed out, a notebook slipped from his bag and landed near her desk. She picked it up before he could reach it, her fingertips brushing the edge of the cover where his hand met hers. It was nothing, barely a touch, but it sent a quiet pulse through the air, the kind that leaves both people unsure whether it was imagined. "You forgot this," she said. Her voice was softer now, almost warm. He smiled, nervous but genuine. "Guess I'm not great at following the rules already." For a moment, she looked at him, not as a teacher assessing a student, but as a woman meeting someone who saw her as more than her title. There was surprise in her eyes first, then something gentler, something she quickly hid. The room felt smaller suddenly. The sound of a clock ticking somewhere near the window became louder. She placed the notebook in his hands, her fingers steady, her expression unreadable. "Be careful with your words," she murmured, almost to herself. He nodded, though neither of them truly understood what he was agreeing to. When he left the classroom, the sunlight felt different, brighter, more alive. The hallway buzzed with conversation, but all he could hear was the echo of her sentence looping in his head. "This is against the rules." He smiled to himself, not in rebellion, but in recognition. Sometimes the rules weren't walls at all, just lines drawn to see who would dare step close enough to understand why they existed. And for the first time, he wanted to know. The following days settled into a rhythm. Classes, notes, quiet nods in passing. But the air between them carried a subtle awareness neither could name. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was woven into small gestures that others would overlook. But to him, each one felt deliberate, like someone tracing a secret pattern only he could see. It started in the library. The room was still, the air thick with the scent of old paper and the hum of air conditioning. He stood on tiptoe, reaching for a book high on the shelf, fingers grazing the spine when another hand, hers, brushed against his. She'd reached for the same title. Their eyes met in the thin slice of light between the shelves. "Popular choice," she said with a faint smile. He laughed under his breath. "Guess I have good taste. Or just similar curiosity." Her words lingered, light and teasing, but her gaze softened as she passed him the book. Their fingertips touched again, brief but charged with quiet electricity. She walked away first, the faint scent of jasmine from her perfume staying longer than she did. It became a pattern, these small, unplanned encounters. A chance meeting at the campus cafe, where she stirred her coffee clockwise, distracted, while he watched the sunlight draw soft shapes across her face. A conversation about literature that drifted easily into talk about music, family, the kind of solitude that comes with growing up too fast or feeling too young. Each time, her tone balanced between warmth and restraint. She never crossed the line first, never gave him more than what could be explained as kindness. Yet there was always something in the way she looked at him, an unspoken acknowledgement that kindness wasn't the only thing being exchanged. He began to notice her in details others missed. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when deep in thought. The subtle crease between her brows when she listened closely. The sound of her laughter, low, genuine, the kind that warmed the space around it. It wasn't infatuation, it was recognition. A feeling that came from seeing someone not as an idea, but as a person, real, flawed, quietly extraordinary. One afternoon, rain began without warning. He found her standing just outside the building, waiting for the downpour to slow. Without thinking, he offered his umbrella. She hesitated, eyes flickering from the umbrella to his face. Then, after a small pause, she stepped beneath it. They walked in silence, the sound of rain soft against the fabric above them. Her shoulder brushed his arm once, twice, each time sending a ripple through him that he tried not to show. She said something about how the rain always made her nostalgic. He answered softly that nostalgia might be another word for remembering what mattered. Her smile, faint and thoughtful, stayed even after they parted. That evening, he realized he wasn't just drawn to her confidence or beauty. It was her stillness, the way she moved through the world like someone who'd learned to carry both grace and loneliness quietly. And somehow, she was letting him see both. The rules hadn't been broken yet, but they were beginning to bend. One shared umbrella, one unspoken glance at a time. Days passed, and their exchanges grew gentler, more familiar, like a song that no one else could hear, but both instinctively knew the melody too. There was still distance, a quiet awareness of the boundaries they both understood too well. But boundaries only hold when no one dares to lean on them. It was late afternoon when it happened, the first small, undeniable shift. The classroom was empty except for them. She sat behind her desk, the glow of the setting sun drawing a halo of gold around her hair as she graded papers. He lingered by the door, pretending to organize notes he didn't need to. "You should go home," she said without looking up. "I will," he replied, "just after this light fades." "It's nice." That made her glance up. Her lips curved slightly. "You appreciate sunsets?" "I like the parts of the day that don't last long," he said softly. "Makes them feel more real." For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them felt almost tangible, thick with things they both knew better than to name. She exhaled quietly, then motioned for him to sit. He did. The distance between them was small, no more than the width of her desk. She leaned back in her chair, studying him with that calm, discerning look that always seemed to see through more than he said. "You're different from the others," she said finally. "How so?" "You listen. Most people only wait for their turn to speak." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I just like what you have to say." That made her pause. Something flickered in her eyes. Amusement, maybe, but mixed with something gentler. She looked away first, her fingers tracing the edge of a paper she wasn't really reading anymore. Silence filled the space again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind that hummed softly with awareness. The room smelled faintly of coffee and chalk dust, warm and familiar. The sunlight slipped lower, painting the floor with long, golden lines. He noticed the faint tiredness in her face, the way her shoulders drooped slightly when she thought no one was looking. "You work too hard," he said. She laughed under her breath. "Comes with the job. Still, even you deserve to rest sometimes." Her eyes lifted to his, and for a second, all pretense fell away. There was vulnerability there, small but real, the kind people rarely show to anyone. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That's kind." He wanted to say more, to tell her that kindness wasn't what this was. But instead, he just nodded. As he stood to leave, she stopped him. "Wait," she said. He turned. She reached out, fingers brushing lightly against his sleeve. It was a tiny gesture, almost nothing, but it felt like the world paused around it. "Be careful," she murmured. "You don't know how easy it is to cross lines without meaning to." He smiled, sadly, gently. Maybe some lines are meant to be crossed. She didn't reply, only looked at him with a quiet ache in her eyes as the last of the sunlight faded behind them, soft, golden, and full of things neither could take back. After that afternoon, things changed in ways neither of them openly acknowledged. She grew quieter in class, professional, composed, her tone careful in ways it hadn't been before. He noticed the subtle shift, the way her glances avoided lingering, the way she spoke to him the same as anyone else now. But it was the silence between them that said everything. He told himself it didn't matter, that she was right to pull away. But every time she passed by, without meeting his eyes, something inside him felt unsteady, like he'd lost something he never had the right to claim. One day, he stayed after class, pretending to look for his notebook. The others left. She gathered her papers, clearly expecting him to go too. "You've been avoiding me," he said quietly. Her hand froze mid-motion. "That's not true." "Then look at me," he whispered. She did, and for a heartbeat, it felt like all the distance collapsed. Her dark eyes, usually so calm, now carried a quiet storm. "You don't understand," she said, voice low. "People talk. They notice things. I can't risk that." He nodded slowly. "So it's easier to pretend nothing's there?" Her breath trembled slightly. "It's not about easy. It's about right." The word right hung in the air, sharp and heavy. He took a step closer, not enough to touch her, but close enough that he could see the faint lines by her eyes, the small details that made her human, made her real. "You've done everything right your whole life," he said softly. "Maybe that's why you've forgotten how it feels to want something that isn't." Her lips parted slightly, as if to answer, but she didn't. Her expression wavered. Conflict, longing, fear, all tangled together. Then she turned away, her back to him. "Please," she whispered, "don't make this harder." He exhaled, his voice soft but steady. "I'm not trying to make it harder. I just don't want to pretend anymore." For a long moment, there was nothing but the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant chatter from a hallway. Then she said, barely above a whisper, "You think this doesn't hurt me too?" That confession cut through the air like a truth neither had wanted to admit. He took another step forward, his voice trembling just slightly. "Then why are we pretending it's wrong to care?" Finally, she turned back to him. Her eyes glistened, not from tears, but from restraint. She shook her head, forcing a small, sad smile. "Because caring isn't the problem," she said softly. "It's what comes after that ruins people." And with that, she walked past him, the faint brush of her sleeve against his arm lingering like a memory. He watched her go, his chest heavy with something he couldn't name. Outside, the world looked normal, the same buildings, the same sky, but something inside him had shifted irrevocably. That night, he couldn't focus on anything. Her words replayed in his head, softer each time, like echoes in an empty room. He didn't know what was worse, losing her slowly, or pretending she'd never been his to lose. A week passed without a single word exchanged between them. The silence stretched longer than he'd expected, and for the first time, the world around him felt dull. Every sound muted, every color pale. Her absence wasn't loud. It was the kind of quiet that made his chest ache in ways he didn't know how to explain. Then came the evening that broke the pattern. It was an unexpected downpour again. Cold, heavy rain drumming against the pavement outside the old campus hall. He'd stayed late to finish a project, and when the power flickered out for a moment, he realized he wasn't alone. She stood by the window, her silhouette outlined by the gray light. "I didn't think anyone was still here," she said softly, turning. "I could say the same to you," he answered, a faint smile tugging at his lips. She hesitated, then exhaled, her shoulders lowering slightly. "I needed quiet." "You always look for quiet when you're hurting," he said before he could stop himself. Her eyes lifted sharply, startled, maybe even a little wounded. Then something softened in her expression. "You notice too much," she murmured. He took a slow step closer. "Only when it's about you." The words hung in the air between them, too honest to take back. She turned toward the rain again, her reflection faint in the glass. "You shouldn't say things like that," she whispered. "Then tell me you don't feel the same," he said quietly. Her silence was louder than anything she could have said. When she finally turned, her face carried both defiance and vulnerability, two emotions pulling against each other. "You think this is simple?" she asked, voice shaking slightly. "You think feelings erase consequences?" "No," he said, stepping close enough that he could smell the faint trace of jasmine from her perfume. I just think pretending doesn't protect anyone. It only hurts longer. She closed her eyes. For a second, the rain filled the silence again, steady, rhythmic, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Then she spoke, barely above a whisper. You're too young to understand the cost of wanting something you can't have. He shook his head slowly. Maybe you're too used to believing you don't deserve it. That broke something in her. Her breath hitched, her composure slipping like a mask too heavy to hold anymore. She reached for the desk beside her, fingers trembling slightly. He saw it then, the exhaustion beneath her strength, the loneliness behind her calm. Without thinking, he reached out. His hand brushed against hers, tentative, careful. She didn't pull away. Their eyes met, and for the first time, neither of them looked away. The world outside blurred into gray and silver. The faint hum of rain became the only sound. She stepped closer, close enough that he could feel her warmth even without touch. Please, she whispered, her voice breaking. Don't make me choose this. He wanted to say something, to promise he wouldn't, but the truth was he already had. In that moment, under the dim light and the rain, the first crack became a collapse, and neither of them could pretend anymore that it wasn't love. The night after the storm, everything felt heavier, like the air itself carried the weight of what had almost happened. Neither of them spoke of it, but the memory lingered like the scent of rain on dry ground. Fresh, intoxicating, impossible to forget. Days passed, yet the distance between them dissolved quietly. It wasn't in grand gestures or reckless words. It was in the pauses, the stolen glances, the faint tremor in her voice when she said his name. He started visiting the library again, not for the books, but for the chance that she might pass by. And sometimes she did, always composed, always pretending not to notice him, until her eyes betrayed her. A brief meeting of gazes, a small exchange of knowing silence. It was enough to keep him going. Then, one evening, as the sun fell behind the horizon, he found her sitting alone in the small garden behind the faculty building. The world around her glowed in the soft amber of twilight, the kind of light that made everything look like a memory. He hesitated before walking over. You always sit here when the day ends, he said gently. She smiled faintly. I like watching the light fade. Reminds me that nothing stays forever. He sat beside her, careful not to crowd her space. You say that like it's sad. It's not, she murmured. It's honest. They sat in silence for a while, the sound of cicadas and distant laughter weaving softly through the air. The wind stirred her hair, and a loose strand brushed his arm. He didn't move away. You've been quiet, she said after a moment. Try not to make things harder, he replied. Her eyes met his calm, searching. And has it helped? He shook his head. No, it just hurts quieter. A small laugh escaped her, tender but sad. You make it sound poetic. Only because it is, he said. You and I were the kind of story that never should have started, but now it's too real to stop. Her breath caught, just barely, but he noticed. She turned toward him, her gaze softening with something deeper than fear. You don't know what you're asking for, she whispered. I'm not asking for forever, he said quietly. Just this moment. She looked at him for a long time, as if searching his face for something to hold on to. Then, slowly, her hand reached out, fingers brushing his cheek. The touch was feather-light, trembling with restraint and need. Time seemed to still around them. He didn't move, didn't speak, just closed his eyes as her hand lingered there. The warmth of her skin seeped into him like sunlight after winter. When she finally pulled away, it wasn't rejection, it was surrender. Her voice was barely a breath. You make it hard to remember why it's wrong. He smiled faintly. Maybe that's because it isn't. The sky had darkened by then, but in that brief space between dusk and night, they existed beyond consequence. Two souls caught in the quiet stillness before the world demanded answers again. And for that single, suspended moment, love felt like the most natural thing in the world. The days that followed felt unreal, a fragile balance between the life they were supposed to live and the one they'd already fallen into without meaning to. Nothing about it was loud or reckless. Their connection existed in quiet places, between looks that lasted too long and silences that said more than words ever could. Still, the tension of reality pressed closer each day. Whispers started, soft, uncertain, about how much time they spent in each other's presence. A lingering conversation here, a late evening there. Neither of them spoke of it, but both felt it. The world was beginning to notice. One afternoon, she called him to her classroom after hours. The sun filtered through the tall windows, painting the room in warm, forgiving light. She stood by her desk, hands clasped together, her posture calm, but her eyes carried the storm. "I think we need to stop," she said quietly. He froze. "Stop what?" "This. Whatever it is we've let happen." He took a slow breath, his heart heavy but steady. "And pretend none of it meant anything." Her voice wavered. "It can't mean something. I'm not a child," he interrupted, his tone soft but firm. "And you're not just my teacher. You're someone who makes me feel like I finally see the world clearly." Her gaze dropped. "You don't understand the cost. I could lose everything." He stepped closer, not to convince her, but to be honest. "Then let me lose it with you." That made her look up. For a second, she seemed to forget how to breathe. The words weren't impulsive. They were steady, sincere, carrying all the quiet truth they'd been too afraid to speak. She laughed, not mockingly, but softly, as if something inside her cracked open. "You really mean that, don't you?" He nodded once. Every word. It was a long pause. The air felt electric but warm. Then, slowly, she reached for him, her fingers trembling slightly as they found his hand. "This is against the rules," she whispered, voice breaking on the edges of guilt and longing. "Then let's break them together," he said. The words settled between them like a promise. Not reckless, but real. She didn't pull away. Instead, she stepped closer until her forehead rested lightly against his chest. He felt her exhale, slow and unsteady, like someone finally letting go of a weight she'd carried too long. They stayed like that, no rush, no need for more, just two people caught in a moment of impossible honesty. The sunlight fell over them, soft and golden, turning everything quiet and infinite. After a while, she looked up at him, eyes glistening, a faint smile trembling on her lips. "You know this changes everything." He smiled back. Maybe that's the point. Outside, the day began to fade, but inside that small, sunlit room, something began instead. Fragile, defiant, beautiful. It wasn't the breaking of rules that mattered anymore. It was the courage it took to stop pretending they hadn't already broken them, and the quiet, unwavering truth that love, even when forbidden, can still be kind, patient, and deeply, beautifully human.